So I don't know when this video is going to go out because knowing me and when I upload stuff, which is way after the fact, all the hype around Heated Rivalry, if you hadn't clocked from the freaking title, will have already like died down. But that's not the point. I'm here because I'm gonna give you my think piece, because let me tell you, originally I wasn't on board. One of my friends, she was locked into this Heated Rivalry business, right? And then she was like as in she'd like read the book and stuff, and then she found out about the show, and then or she found out about the show and decided, but it was before it was like being streamed like absolutely everywhere, so she was like trying to find out if she could watch it in the UK, and then like she paid for like a Now TV subscription when it came to UK to watch it and stuff like that. And then she was telling me like, oh, and listen, I'm nothing if not curious, and like that is my most iconic personality trait in my opinion. And so, I mean, can I say that? I feel like I can say that. And so then I was like, I'm now making it my mission. And then I was getting through the book and I was like, okay, you know what? I see what they're doing. Personally, I think the writing style isn't amazing, but I'm quite easily pleased, and I could easily give any book 3 stars. It just has to be really, really good for me to give it 5, but you have to do something really bad for me to give you like 2 stars or below, for example. And so, yeah, I was like, oh. And then I started watching the show, and listen, if I've ever seen a TV adaptation that's good, it's this one, because it's actually good. I wish they had a bigger budget, because I think that they had to miss a lot of things out because their budget wasn't big. But the actual, I think the what's the best way to put it, the portrayal of the 2 main characters is impeccable. I genuinely think nobody could have done a better job. Obviously, I don't really know too much about casting or like whatever, but they also did ultimate reverse casting, because every like clip and stuff that I've seen on socials about the 2 lead characters, like they're like so opposite to their character. And like if I didn't, like that's what acting's all about, right? You portray someone else, but they're literally the opposite of their characters. From, obviously I don't know them, but like from what I've seen. And if I like didn't know, I'd be like, oh, like if I didn't know who they were, I'd be like, oh, obviously that guy plays Ilya and that guy plays Shane because of the way they're behaving. But really, oh, I'm shaking the whole thing. It's really opposite. So, what exactly is it that like is making? I think it's like, my thing is like, what is the gravity of like Ilya and Shane, and like why is the entire world obsessed? And that's what I'm gonna talk about basically. So this is like a think piece. This is my letter about Heated Rivalry. How about that? I've got notes here, so don't mind. I didn't memorize it because we're past the memory game, okay? We're out of school now, okay? So we're just going to be talking about what it is, like it's like changed cultural architecture. It's like sparked a lot of obsession, I guess. And like I want to talk about like the banter between the 2 characters and how it actually serves as like complex defense, psychological defense. Anyway, you'll see. Okay, so let's start quickly. So the architecture essentially of the greatest rivalry. And so we're looking at a sports trope, and so we can see that the book isn't just trying to be a romance book, it's trying to be a deconstruction of hyper masculine performance. But in this case, in hockey, but there's other sports romances out there. So like there's like an F1 one, I know, but I personally haven't read that. But basically, the sport and like sports media focuses on like the physical glory of games, and then this story focuses on like the psychic cost of that excellence and like what's going on for those characters, because I think the audience like resonates with the fact that it isn't just about attraction, but it's about the loneliness of some of these elite, they're elite players, like they say again and again and again, how they're the 2 greatest players of that generation. And both Ilya Rozanov and Shane Hollander are isolated essentially, even though they've got their talent. The whole world is chanting for them, or their prospective fans are chanting for them, but they're being isolated because of their talent and also by their sexuality in this case. And then you see that they find each other, and they aren't essentially just finding a partner, but they're also finding somebody else in the world who basically speaks their specific language of pressure, because they're both maybe feeling it in different ways, but they're both feeling a type of pressure in the same way, and they're in the same vicinity, and so they sort of latch on to each other. And then they're using their banter essentially as like a tactical shield, because there's a lot of chemistry between Ilya and Shane, and it's witty, but I think it actually serves as a psychological survival tool for both of them. So like Ilya trolls Shane all the time, but the banter that he's using is a weapon to like hide his own problems that he's going through, because he's growing up in oh god, I haven't set this camera up very well, have I? He's going through these he's part of two very specific cultures, like being Russian but then also hockey culture, and both of them are demanding stoicism, and he basically uses his humor to deflect anything, and he could be considered as like annoying or like, you know, just like a bit irritating or whatever, but he's essentially controlling the narrative, and this is his way of doing it, and he's the one pushing the button so that no one can get close enough to push his, whereas Shane on the other hand is like the golden boy of the sport and the script of this book and TV show, because he's basically been coached since very young, and you see that with his interactions with his like mom as well, who's basically like the Kris Jenner of his life, the momager, about what is the right thing to do. And his banter is with Ilya is the only time that he kind of goes off script, and he doesn't like try to be the golden boy and like do the right thing, because he's just like, Ilya's provoked him into like being his like real, true, authentic self, even if it's portraying like anger and frustration, because he hasn't really had that time. And this sort of creates a feedback loop between them, because Ilya needs Shane to see the man who he is behind his mask, and Shane bites back because Ilya is the only person who doesn't treat him like he's this fragile brand that needs to be protected. And so in doing so, they've created this narrative where they're trying to break the taboo about like the safe violation. And so you've got NHL, which is like National Hockey League, and it provides this like really high stakes environment for breaking these boundaries, because in the world of heated rivalry we have like the locker room culture. Like I always say, the boys are the biggest gossips, and you can see that in the show and like hear about it in the book, whatever, because you can see like the suffocating entity that enforces this like heteronormativity through silence, because the book is basically teaching you that like the taboos are being maintained because of like fear or distraction, because both Ilya and Shane's relationship is like a direct challenge to what a real athlete is, and what they must be like the archetype that is created for them, and their rivalry isn't broken by their romance. In fact, if anything, I think it fuels it, enhances it, because it suggests an authenticity, because you'll notice that they're very much like, lol, if I'd ever let you win. It doesn't get in the way. If anything, it makes it better, and it's like a secret authenticity, because they know like what they did and the night before, or that what they're going to do afterwards, etc. But it's like their motivator, rather than the fear of being caught, so it's not actually distracting them that much. I think another way in which, besides just the sexuality part, that heated rivalry breaks boundaries is about heritage and like the burden of being the first. And I feel like a lot of people don't talk about this. So if we look specifically first at Shane Hollander, you've got this whole like intersection between race and identity, because one of the most profound layers of his story or Shane's experience is the fact that he's an Asian Canadian. In the book, he's a Japanese Canadian. His mom's Japanese and his dad is Canadian. And the real actor who plays Shane Hollander, Hudson Williams, is also a Asian Canadian, but I think he's Korean. but it's about the Asian Canadian experience in a sport that's overwhelmingly a white sport. And so he's got this model minority pressure because Shane feels like he doesn't have the luxury of like having a scandal. Like he can't have one, he might not be able to come back one, because unlike his white counterparts and his white teammates who might be more rebellious, Shane feels the weight of representing his entire community and how that could create a backlash on them. And then the intersectionality is crucial because his reluctance to come out isn't just about like him being gay or whatever. It's about the fear of people failing to see who he is as a pioneer. And then we also have his family dynamic, because Shane's parents are portrayed with like a particular nuance. The pressure isn't like rooted necessarily in like homophobia or anything like that. I don't think his parents ever come across that way, but it's about them wanting their son to succeed. And you can particularly see that like in the TV show, you really feel like Shane's mom is like a tiger mom, if you know what that means, because they have this desire for their son to be seen in a specific way, and they know that the world is rigged against him. And so it creates this like tragic irony, because they've prepared him to survive the outside, but they haven't prepared for him to survive his own internal isolation, which is interesting. But then if we flip the table to Ilya Rozanov, we have him as like the villain of the Cold War is the image he's being given, because Ilya's like identity of being Russian is like just like about his accent or like whatever. It's a political and social cage for him, because he's got like the Russian context, because the story doesn't shy away from saying that like being queer in Russia is like the reality of that is not very good, and they hint at the fact that, like, that they don't want to find out like what would happen. And like Ilya's a villain persona is the NHL's like clever adaptation of that. They say he's stoic, he's like this, and then they're just like, oh, he's Russian, you know what I mean? Oh my god, this is gonna embarrass me again. Whatever. But it's also we're seeing him as like this arrogant, cold Russian, but people don't see like the softer, like queer man underneath. I need some water. Listen, I've thought about this, if you hadn't noticed. I run away with the wind, I go into the rabbit hole. And then we also have his relationship with his father, because Ilya's relationship with his father and his older brother serves as this like haunting reminder essentially of what he stands to lose, because his father represents like the old world, and where he values like masculinity, and it's like synonymous with the silence that he has. And then we have Ilya's journey realizing that he can be a Rozanov but still be himself, and he's like building this bond. And you kind of see that with his interactions with Svetlana. I think I'll get more into that in a second, but like you can see, he very little is holding him on into Russia. And I think you also see that he has this sense of guilt that he's like doesn't get to spend time with his father, but his way of like showing his love is like making sure. There's a whole monologue where he's like saying like, I try to make sure everything's perfect for them, but they have the clothes they like, the food they want, la la, but all they want is more. They just want money. Like they don't see like what this is like drawing out from me. And you also notice that, I'm really hoping that everybody's watched this, but when he finally decides that he's not really, after his father dies, that he's not going to go back to Russia, like he hates going back anyway, and now he doesn't really have a reason to go back, that he is sort of cutting his ties from there. And then I would also find it really sad when I see like sad relationships between siblings, because him and his brother have this really like tense dynamic, and it's really sad to see that, but it's honest reality that some people's siblings relationships are like that, and it's quite sad. But I would like to mention, I just mentioned Svetlana a second ago, so I'm going to now talk about Svetlana and Rose, because I feel like they're quite different characters, but they serve very specific purpose. So if we talk about, so we've got, because the story is obviously from a very like male perspective, but they're talking about the females in these people's lives. And so you've got Svetlana, who is like the mirror of his reality, because in the book, Svetlana is just like a friend that he's basically made. Her dad was also a hockey legend, and now she lives in New York, and he just feels like she gets her, and she gets him, and that he is like, it's easy to be around her and stuff like that, and that she actually knows a lot about hockey, and he actually kind of like can tolerate her. Whereas in the show, she's like a childhood friend, same kind of concept of knowing a lot about hockey, but they provide a sort of solace, because it's like she doesn't know everything about him, but she also doesn't pry, and she just seems to know stuff, if that makes sense. So she represents this sort of piece of home that Ilya has of Russia, but outside of Russia. And I think it almost serves as a reset for him, and you can see that she knows things about him, like she knows somewhat about his sexuality, and she knows somewhat about the problems that he faces, and she kind of like is there being like, I'll keep your secret, Lala. And you see a lot of times when Ilya's having his like back and forth about his sexuality, and when he, especially near the start, because I always forget how long the book spans because of the whole like date thing, but I guess when you watch the TV show, you get to see, like, it says like summer 2011, like summer 2016, whatever that you see. But you can see at that time when he's considering like, oh, like, do I just marry Svetlana, that he's like thinking, and he knows that she'd probably do it, and I think he says multiple times in the book, he's like, she'd do it, like, to support me. And I think that really says something. But even in the show, she's like, I love you, but I know that like you love somebody else more. And then if we do the flip, we've got Rose, who's like the blueprint of freedom, and is like Shane's North Star, because it's the first time that he feels like somebody understands where he's coming from, and someone's accepting him. And like, she's the first one to like point it out to him properly. And I just thought, it's just not a very long section, but I just thought it was interesting. But we also have subplots, and I kind of have mentioned these, but I will carry on. But we've got the subplots of both of the parents of each of them create. So we have like the Hollander legacy, like I said. So they feel like their perfection or their success is conditional, and that the support and everything that his parents provide is also conditional, which is sort of stopping him from telling his parents. And I think Shane feels that the best way to pay back his parents for all the sacrifices that they've made is to just like be the perfect person that he can be. And this creates a psychological barrier for him, because then he feels like coming out isn't really a personal choice for him. It's going to affect a lot of people. It's going to dismantle this whole Hollander brand that his family's worked so hard to build. And then on the other side of the table, we've got Rosanov and like everything that he does, because his father represents this like great wall of traditionalism, and you can see the tension there, and then the like underlying homophobia and everything like that. And in the eyes of his father, any deviation from being like hyper masculine, because there's like this whole bit where he talks about his hair and stuff like that, is like a weakness to him. And so he's like, I can't do that. And so Ilya's having this internal struggle to like decouple his heritage from all these toxic expectations that has come with that. So crazy. And then again, I feel like I'm flip-flopping back and forth here, but as you can, I think there's also the twice as good rule, because like Shane feels like this isn't just about hockey, like he's becoming a symbol, and you see that represented in the TV show and stuff like that by him getting all these brands. And basically Shane operates with the subconscious pressure that he needs to be twice as good to get like half the credit. And he knows that if he makes any mistake, he's going to be criticised, and he might be criticised through the lens of his race. And then adding him being gay to that equation is like an impossible burden for him, and he doesn't want to deal with that. And then we also have the model of minority myth, because there's like this minority model that is being made for him, and he feels like he just wants to like not be complicit in that. And then what have we got? I feel like I've already said that, so I'm going to... Oh, yes, actually, I thought this was talking about the interactions and stuff. So, like, for Ilya, like, NHL is a sanctuary for him. He uses, like, playing hockey as his escapism, and they mention that, whereas for Shane, he's just always loved the sport and he just wants to be part of it. So they're in the sport for different reasons, but that's not to, like, take away either of them from what it is. But, like, for Ilya, he doesn't want to, like, break his like locker room rule, but then also his reality. And then we have this like rivalry banter that happens between them, and like every time he flirts with Shane, for example, like on the ice or in post interviews game, he's playing like this really high stakes game of chicken with his own safety. And he does say like, I like trouble, like I'm danger and stuff like that. And to be honest, at first that really threw me off, because I'm like, oh my god, is he just playing with Shane? But really it was, like I said, his mental barrier, and he was just trying to see like what he could do. Also, I think one of the reasons this book is obviously so popular is because of the enemies to lover thing, but I feel like for real, they're not really enemies. They're just being told they're enemies, and then they just kind of go with it, and they just let themselves do that. I don't feel they ever actually hate each other, and I think that's an interesting take on enemies to lovers, because that doesn't really always happen. And then if we looked at their weaponized banter for like the private language that they've got going on, they've got this like their banter changes over time, because in the beginning Ilya's teasing of Shane is like at arm's length, then by the end it's like really happening for their safety and stuff like that. So they've got like this in-joke of intimacy where the two men are being constantly watched by cameras and fans, and the ability to communicate and stuff like that. And then you sort of get this like softening over time. One of my favorite scenes is where, like I said, in the book they had to do things, in the show they had to do things different from the book, because there's in the book, Shane basically buys this whole plot of land and like doesn't let anybody live there so that nobody could find out about them. But they don't get to do that in the show, but they just get him to come in through like the back door or something. And I loved it when he turned up and he was like, "Are you gonna murder me?" And then Shane comes inside and goes, "Maybe." And I just thought that was really interesting, because it just shows you that they're scared, they're nervous in their own ways. And the way that Shane is nervous in Montreal when they're coming to his house and Ilya's kind of going like, "What are you doing?" is interesting, because when he's back in Russia and they're there for the Olympics, he says to Shane like, "No, we can't do this here." And I just thought that was really interesting, because now he's scared and he's nervous. I do think like in the show they don't have like I said, a separate place for that. And so they just show that he uses the back door to go to Shane's house. But for me, that was one of the biggest sort of like, not theories, I don't know how to say that, but like biggest aspects or something like that. I don't know how I'm portraying this, but the idea that Ilya doesn't know about Shane's home space, and then it's like a really big deal when Ilya's like, "Show me your house, what does it look like?" And then when Shane lets him come to his house, actual house, for the first time, it's like a big thing. To me, I felt like that was a big thing, and I was like, guys, I wish you had a bigger budget so you could show that. But yeah, you see like Ilya softening over time, especially the scene where Shane gets hurt and Ilya's like, "Is he okay? Is he okay?" And then even Shane is like, as the paramedics are carrying off, are saying, "Tell him I'm fine, he'll just worry." Like you see like over time like how like close they've become. But you can also see the catharsis of the long game, because the story sort of peaks when their like secret becomes too heavy of a burden to carry, and like it isn't just about winning the Stanley Cup now, it's about winning the right to exist. And you know, there's a public reveal and stuff like that, because you see that, because the heated rivalry is part of a bigger game changers thing, and so they do mention, because if this was isolated, I'd be like, why aren't these two the ones that are being the pioneers? Why is it frickin' what's his name, Scott and Kip, right? First of all, who shortens Christopher to Kip? But whatever. Anyway, maybe they do. I don't know. But I was like, what? But then it's like that's the trigger for them, that they're like, oh. And then you don't. They've been doing this secret hooking up, whatever, for so long, and then they start planning about how they're going to finally reveal themselves one day, and it's like almost a decade later, because they're doing it after they retire. And apparently there's an actual couple that exists who have a similar story to this, where there's an American female ice hockey player and a Canadian female ice hockey player, and they were like not rivals, but like kind of rivals. They played on opposing teams and they were pitted against each other as like one being American, one being Canadian, and they were both like on par with each other and like excelling in their fields, and they just like formed a friendship and and over time, like after they retired, they got married and now they have like kids together. But it's like that whole like similar same concept, and I just think that's crazy. But it's like they've marketed their rivalry, and it's like they don't even remember like ever hating each other, and so now they're like, well, how do we come out as we've been hooking up this whole time, but really we were supposed to hate each other? And they're now planning how to like soft launch each other like slowly. So first they have to show that they don't hate each other, they can work together, all of this, and then maybe at some point they'll be able to tell them these, obviously not saying what happens in the long game or the new book, I can't remember what Unrivaled or whatever it's called. Yeah, crazy. But yeah, I think I've already mentioned this, that the show, the TV show, really does portray the like chemistry and everything between, and all the concepts really well, because you can really get it. So why can't we look away from heated rivalry? I think it's because it's become a cultural phenomenon, and that's because it represents this collision of worlds, of like this, where there's this rigid, old school, traditional, professional hockey regime, and then you meet like fluid and modern reality, and how reality is always changing. And then by grounding the romance into the difficulties of like Ilya's heritage, Shane's identity as an Asian Canadian, and then the story is moved by the author, so it's like past a simple romance, because now you've got all these additional aspects that they're trying to navigate, such as their families respectively, their respective cultures, the respective pressures that they're feeling, and like their respective discoveries. Because I think they say that like obviously this is Shane's like figuring out like, oh, like I'm gay, and Ilya's figuring out like, oh, like I actually think I love somebody for the first time ever. It's like this whole thing, and so it's created a blueprint to dismantle like this barrier that's been created. So the story is basically telling us that excellence is not a shield against loneliness, because you don't get to see that. They're so excellent that they feel so lonely because they feel like nobody else gets them, and maybe that's why they're drawn to each other, because they're like, oh, we're both in the same boat. And that cultural heritage can both be an anchor, because it can provide you direction, but also a weight, because then you have that pressure on you and it might just be slowing you down. And that true rivalry isn't just a conversation that hasn't found is just a conversation that hasn't found honesty yet, because again, at first they just hate each other, and then as they get to know each other, I think Shane says at one point to one of his teammates, like, oh, like he's not that bad, like. So ultimately, I think the reason that Ilya and Shane resonate so deeply, it's in the way that they represent ultimate human desire, because is, you know, the desire to be seen by one person who's truly your equal. And I think I saw this whole concept is like, why do like females like this show, and why do females like this book? And I think it's less to do with like the like explicit content of the book. I think people are going to run away with that. I definitely think it's more to do with the feeling of desire and humanity, and I think it really is made for the female gaze, and I'm seeing that, and whoever said that, well done, because I think you are right. But yeah, like in a world that demands that they both be icons, they choose to be each other's person, so they can both be icons together and break boundaries together. So yeah, that's my letter about it. Okay. if I have ever overthought a book, here it is. Here it is. So thanks for that. Sorry for looking a mess. Also, my hair is now mostly dry, which is what I was trying to achieve while I was sitting here, I was like, why don't I tell people my thoughts on Heated Rivalry? Again, not a freaking clue when this is gonna upload. If you've made it through, well done. Go ahead and watch the show. It's on Sky in the UK, and it's also on Now TV if you could be bothered to pay for the subscription. And it's been picked up for 2 more seasons, I think. And I think the books are out now too in Waterstones, because originally, because it's indie author, it was difficult. I don't know why I'm telling you all these things, like they're sponsoring me to say it, but listen. If it's getting the people in the world reading, and it's getting people in the world thinking about, you know, like social problems, I'm all for it. I don't think I had any problem with that, and I'm really happy with them. And thank you to the Canadian taxpayers, because this show, I believe, was funded by the Canadian taxpayers. Listen, I don't know how all that works, but in my eyes, it's probably like the BBC of Canada have like Canada? Did I just say that? The BBC of Canada have paid to produce the show, or like bought the rights to air it. I don't know. Maybe Crave is like a national streaming. I don't know. Okay, but all I know is thank you to those people. Okay, it's enough now. I'm gonna go to bed because that's crazy. Okay.